I thank those who left and came back, and those who came back as well, who came in, sorry. And I don't know if there were two questions from the previous panel who went unanswered, which applied to this presentation about generational exchanges or turnovers and the roads that lead to rural schools and small rural towns, an infrastructure which I know not much about, but it's an infrastructure that's been deteriorated and it's being depopulated in a motion that does not help with rurality. We will listen first to Maria Vedoya. Thank you.
Remoto. Ahí está. No, porque antes vos no sabés lo que fue ese tema.
You have your remote control. We've had trouble with our remotes before, but okay, you managed. I thank the organizers of this Congress. There are very many of us here. It doesn't look like that, but there's a lot of us present here who will also be able to multiply the message. Rural education lacks prestige, so it's good to see you here. And hopefully this conversation will allow multiplication further on. I did not know how to title my presentation, so I said education first. And I'm an educator, and this, to me, is the crux of the matter. Education may save us. But I also hear that the main culprit is the lack of education. So being a savior and a detractor is pretty bad. But basically, the concerns of people have to do with employment and health and economy, and education comes in last after those three. So first, if it's education first, then we should mind this topic, about this topic. This is me. I was not a rural student. I don't have a past as a rural anything, but I went to a private school, boring, very private, and I was not a very good student, and I rebelled against the manners of that school. Then I was a repeater student in high school, but I ended up my high school as the standard bearer. I was not a very good student. My behavior was lacking. And when I went to the headmaster's office, I found Sarmiento, our Thomas man, and he looked like he was not happy with me. And that marked me forever. Today, I have 5 kids. And something happened to me last year. I was called in at school to talk about one of my kids, and I thought, you know, what did he do? But they called me because he ran all over the place, and I thought that was silly. But anyway, I went to the headmasters, and I found this pop version of Sarmiento, still looking angry. So his message has never improved. Whatever people do, he always looks concerned and angry. So when they asked me to participate in this panel, I thought, what do I talk about here? I'm not a rural student. But yes, I have been participating in different educational projects, so I thought maybe I can tell a few stories and maybe we can learn something from those stories. My first story was not personal for me, but this is a rural school in Chuña in northern Cordoba, a province in the center of Argentina, and this rural school is in the middle of nowhere. And you say, oh, how nice, a small rural school in the middle of nowhere. But Chuña is a 600 people inhabitant small town, and the school could not do what they had to do to make it good. So what parents and students thought is, what are we going to do? There's nothing here. What can we learn? What can we do? Until somebody started thinking, what do we have? And let's manage it, manage the littleness and see what to do with that. So that is a change of outlook. And so a lot of people realize there are a lot of prickly pears. And so what to do with prickly pears? I mean, it's not copper, it's not gold, it's prickly pear plants. And so what to do? We can do aromatics, essential oils, a lot of byproducts of the prickly pear. So they had this minor project. They won a town fair and a province fair, as well as the science fair of all of Argentina. And they ended up in California presenting their prickly pear project there. So what did I learn from this experience? Well, the sooner you change your outlook, the better. As fast as possible, if we're talking of rural education. No romantic outlooks here. It's a little school in the middle of nowhere. No, a huge school in the middle of everything, because the only thing that they needed was to give a different look to what they had. And after this change of outlook, there was an alignment of the students, of the parents, of the calling of the people there, and they ended up in California. So I'm convinced that for those students participating in the project, their lives have been changed forever. The significance of this change of regard meant everything. So if we say rural little school, we diminish the school in the middle of nowhere. There's always something, some potential from which to build. Second story, in 2021, a company group called me from the province of La Pampa in Quemu. They were saying, we're concerned that a lot of adolescents graduate from high school, but they have nowhere to go because there's no higher education here. So we started thinking of a scholarship program. There are young people to whom this happens, but also there's other young people who do not complete their high school studies, let alone going elsewhere to further their education. So let's put together a course to train those students, the labor that is needed, and let's train them in short courses that have to do with what they can do locally. So we went to the INTA, we identified professors and coaches, the ministry certified the courses offered by the foundation Encender, which means light up. And, well, then the second effort was identifying the people who were going to take the course. 30 registered. So our first question was, what are you doing here? Well, I want a course on tractors. Why? Well, because I want to learn how to drive a tractor. Why? Because I want to get a job. Why do you want a job? Because I want money. And why do you want money? Because I want my children to have more opportunities than I did. Forget it. No going back. When they discover that last why, there's no return. So in rurality, changing the outlook, generating these questions and answers, places those youngsters before a different perspective regarding their future. So when we start asking why, the second thing we say is, I believe in you. And then most of the kids would say, it's the first time somebody asked me what I want to do, and it's the first time somebody has asked me or told me, I believe in you. The foundation Encender multiplied their methodology of work in different town halls. The municipality of Ameghino and another town in the area said, we like this. Let's see how we can replicate this. And so now they have allied, and also a number of companies in the area, 100 kilometers around, wanted Encender there or Encender coming to them. So it's not just creating the opportunity, but also coordinating, articulating action the best way possible. And what I like about Encender is that the logo is like switching on your phone. This is what you can do by simply answering a call, responding why. And my second opportunity was personal. I started working in Salta, northern Argentina, and I found there was no good drinking water there. It was brackish water, basically. And so my preconception was, let's solve the access to good water at schools. So I talked to the person in charge. He did not answer my calls because it was an area code from Buenos Aires, so nobody responds an area code from Buenos Aires up there in northern Argentina. So I told him about how stocking rainwater and putting in big tanks, etc., etc. And then I said, listen, Porteño, guy from Buenos Aires, what I need is a fridge. And I thought, a fridge, a refrigerator, that is how I will contribute to get some water for the school? Yes, definitely, because I live here, my kids eat here, and I don't have anywhere to keep the food. So my project that year was to buy a fridge for them. And then that was my protagonism there. Major learning for myself. Nobody wants what they don't want. I was not interested in giving them a fridge until I understood that the fridge was their main need at the time. So we can come close to the rural educational system where they lack all of the things we think they lack. But if we change our preconceptions and we contribute social capital, experience, novelties, their story will change. That was my learning from the fridge. So shut up and listen to them before offering. That was my own learning. Why am I telling you these three stories? Because the invitation and what I urge you to do is thinking of rural education and thinking of those students and systems. We should invite them for them to see Sarmiento smiling because we have transformed our reality. We have transformed a school. Thank you.
Ahí está, les dije que iba a ser interesante.
I said it would be interesting. And then Alicia Fregonese, coordinator, chair of Entre Rios General Council. Are you sort of a minister of education? Right. But she can approach a more systemic look on a problem of the province with a large percentage of rural life in her territory and a specific look at rural schools. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for inviting me to share the panel with Luis. He was my professor, actually. We were talking today, and I was saying that the rural school was an example. I remember that at the time of the lockdown, Clarín, a newspaper in Argentina, interviewed me, and I said that we had to look at the rural school because it has the flexibility that lets organizations come in and come up with something different. That is a rural school. It's willing to receive, and it's flexible, that the urban school does not have. You have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth year in my province, Entre Rios, in the urban area. In rural areas, you don't have teachers, so you work by areas, and that is what we want, a flexibility. The rural school is marvelous, I think. Talking about my story, I'm an English teacher. I got married and went to live in the countryside. So I always lived on a gravel road, and then I moved even farther away. I don't know whether you know clay. It's pretty horrible. You get stuck and don't come out anymore. It happened to me. I was working and helping in rural education. We worked a lot, and I was always interested in politics. And Luis was asking me, why did you get into politics? My dad was a politician, so I had that commitment with people, with society. I was in the middle of the countryside. I had my life in Buenos Aires till I was 11. And rural schools came to me for me to teach English, and also because there was this teacher who was going on leave for so many months, and when they came back, the kids did not know that she was not going to come back actually to work, but for administrative actions. And so people told me, Alicia, help. So all parents wrote a letter to the department chair. The director was sacked, dismissed, and she was named the director at another school. And so I said, well, this is not good. When I had the chance, while Esteban Bullrich was the Minister of Education, I was called to coordinate rural education. And there I learned what you are saying, Luis, about the flexibility of rural schools. Last year, I had the chance to go to Spain. I'll show my presentation later. And students, they have a foundation called Trilima. That's very interesting. It works with educational projects from kindergarten. Kids use a project approach from the very beginning. So they are superstars. And when we were at the Ministry of Education of Argentina, the coordination of rural education had local projects. Provinces registered, Argentina's government would give them some money, and kids were working on a per project basis 10 years ago. See what rural schools are, you see? When I was thinking of this rural school in this presentation that we said, the roots for settlements and development, I talked to Rogelio Frigerio, our governor. Everything we're doing with the difficulties we're facing in Entre Rios, we could not do this without the political support that we have from the governor. They don't just look at our presentations, but they give our opinions, and the governor tells me his feedback, and I get 3 or 4 messages a day saying, Ali, don't you think that this and such, and that is so valuable. So he said, he was talking about the relevance of rural schools as a place for students' socialization, and those who live in rural areas know what isolation is, what loneliness is, what schools without enrolled kids are, meaning there may be one teacher and one student. These kids do need a socialization instance, and we know what isolation is. In 38 years in the countryside, my friends, some are 140 kilometers away, some are 80 kilometers away, but I can move. I have a four-wheel drive truck. I can go around. But there are people who can't, and people who don't have anyone by them. I'm in a rural area, in a bush area with few friends, and that is the daily reality of people living in the countryside. So rural schools are not a value in themselves because of the system and the flexibility they use, but also because they make sense to the word community, rural community. Luis always asks me, why did you get engaged in politics? I've been working with civil society associations, but when you get into politics and start seeing what happens in the territory with schools, and you say, I need to work in the alphabetization program, such as we are doing, and you say, we're going to buy books for all primary school or elementary school kids. We're going to train all teachers, all professors. If we do it right and have continuity and a robust plan, that can take education forward. Now let me tell you a bit about rurality is, what rurality is like in Entre Rios. And you say, oh, there's a great spread of people in Entre Rios. And you may just think otherwise. Rural education in Entre Rios is over 50% of education. The province of Córdoba has 35, Santa Fe 35, sorry, Córdoba 30. 85% of our roads are gravel. And that graph by Mariana, who's here with us, the Director of Planning and Educational Assessment, you see what rurality means in different levels. At the initial level, it's 51%. And so there's very good news in this data. 51% of the initial level is consolidated in rurality, meaning there is one teacher in charge. Because typically in rural areas which are multi-grade or multi-level, you have teachers who have different students from different levels. We've managed to create a level in rurality. That was kindergarten. In elementary schools is 55%. And something that is very painful, well, not painful, but rather complex. Almost 67% of those rural schools, elementary schools, are spread all over the place. Rural schools, 1 with 5 students, at a place without access, 1 with 3 students, 6 kilometers away without an access, and when it's raining they can't go. And in high school, it's good news to know that we have 250 rural schools with 500 people. That is 34%. This is the educational system in the rural side of education in the province of Entre Rios. Do you mind if I stand up, or else I'm very complicated? I'm so sorry, I'm acting teacher-like. This is the province of Entre Rios, 17 departments, and when we say, what can we do to improve rural schooling? What we are doing and we are looking into is what components have an impact so that rural schools can continue to be in place and be a resource for families. And we see the registration on a per department basis, and the other map of Entre Rios shows the number of schools per department. And here, the most important thing is the relation between number of students enrolled, schools and departments. We are working with the Ministry of Production, with the Roads Authority, and what I'm told is there is a strong component, production component, when there is intensive production where staff are required in the countryside, rural population grows. So the municipalities and the departments up there, Concordia, Paraná, Uruguay, Villaguay, Federación, La Paz, have more intensive productions such as birds, a very, very important activity in Entre Rios, and that is an important generation opportunity for rural schools to have educational poles, citrus production, pig farms, and intensive cattle breeding with feedlots and all. And of course, dairy farms. Those are the most important production activities, even when there's tourism now and some wine production activities. And there is where you have more rural students, because farmers need the families to remain back in the countryside. I don't know whether you are in rural areas, but many rural families go to the countryside, settle down there, and as there is no school or there is no road, the family goes back to town. The worker stays back in the countryside until one day this person says, stop it, I can't do it anymore, and they go back to town. So the number of kids enrolled in rural schools is a very volatile variable. Pandemic at that time was critical because it started changing the mindset of many young couples who decided to, remember, they rented rural houses or houses in the countryside. Young couples started moving to outside the cities and towns, and so they started living in very urban areas. And so the activities I was talking to you about, like birds, pigs, and citrus activities, and our challenge, larger spread and fragmentation of the student base, which requires new planning. What is going on? Enrollments in the cities are changing. It's not the same thing. Many people are leaving to the countryside, and if there are gravel roads or there's too long a distance with a good road, these people will move out of town, and even more if there is connectivity, and more if they have a four-wheel drive truck, and more if they have a job. What do young families want? Quality of life, quiet places, lesser costs, because when you go to rural areas you spend less. Security, and so rural education, both local and community education, becomes the main axis of the settlement project for us. And the governor always tells us we have 300 schools with less than 5 students. We have to go back and rethink the makeup of our educational system. We need to understand that the most important role we have is getting the students' educational life to be satisfactory, and it needs to have parents around, because that is better. And the rural school where younger kids work with older kids. I have my 5-year-old grandchild teaching my 2-year-old grandchild, and so there is crossbreeding. We started our tenure last year, many decades with other people, and it was clear in our minds that rural education, little had been done about it actually. So the first challenge, and we are getting there, is articulation with the roads authority, with the economy and productions authorities, to understand how we can accompany those schools, families, and farmers so that they can also accompany the school. Because we say, as government or as an agency, we can't have a camera at all rural schools and see whether kids go to school every day. But governments, local governments, the community governments, municipal governments, farmers can see. They know whether those employees with children are taking their kids to school. And we need that because we also need the commitment for families to keep on believing or go back into believing that a tool for change, that a tool for social migration will help form your future. And it can be any. The student may choose, but we need to make sure there is a possibility of choice.
And then grouping schools with lower attendance, fewer kids. We are working on this grouping via physical education. Rural schools do not have phys ed because they don't have a teacher or a trainer. So that's what we are working on. We also have a learning school to teach them to read, so we are training teachers to be able to learn how to read and write. Then also accessibility is another thing we are working on. I live in I work at a school in the middle of muddy areas. How to improve accessibility. We said how many schools we were, how many students we were, and in that way we allowed for the creation of a consortium. People in the rural area keep different timetables, and so working around those timetables, and then also thinking that it's not just a little rural school, but a great school. What about the potential of the General Educational Council? We have programs to accompany and train and educate. We have materials for several grades learning together, which is very specific of rurality. There's avidity for teachers and directive personnel to see that we are there for them. When we are there for them, they feel it and they ask for it as well. Rural schools may also be a bridge between education and production. What you were saying about bringing students closer to real life, teaching them things that have something to do with what they will do in the future. Innovative modalities. Last week, somebody said to me, 2 rural schools were closed. Let's put together an agro-technical high school for several academic years to study together, and then also fostering networks between schools. Not for competition, but rather to focus on the student at the center of the educational process. And also, I would like to say that we are strengthening the central region of Argentina, and in the province of Entre Rios, we have created an area to evaluate and assess educational quality. We need to measure and assess our own politics. The policies need to be assessed, and it's the first time that Entre Rios has allowed us to take tests in order to know that what we are doing is working or not. And this also applies to rurality, how what we do can have an impact on learning. And that is all. Thank you very much.
No, igual ahora seguimos conversando.
We will go on talking anyway. You can send your questions now to these to this WhatsApp number. And I was carefully listening, and a question comes to mind right away. What's systemic, and no doubt a story may change a student's life, but it's just one story and one life, and it's okay, but we want something more systemic. This is what Alicia was saying when she talks about Entre Rios. But you did mention Entre Rios, one province, has 300 schools with less than 5 kids in them. So my question is, how, if we think systemically, how can we consider rurality without trying to promote the areas where there's almost no one? I don't mean that these areas should become cities, but maybe something more enduring, because when the school has no kids, it'll have to close, shut down. Well, schools never totally close down. If there are no students, then there's, I have very many pieces of research in Entre Rios. Yes, they do close down, but when the students reappear, they open up again. I mean, they don't just go up in smoke. But how to have communities settle down in rural areas? I think your question is that. And when there's a service, when the service makes sense, the school will come back. I live in the middle of faraway area, and there's a rural community not far from where I am that has a church, police station, businesses, stores, vets, gas stations in the middle of nowhere. But there's a population there that wishes to stay on. There's production that drives them, and that's where we put together the roads consortium that takes care of the roads, and that brings life to them. Communication and access is the secret. Absolutely, you have answered the question. Yes, but then the same question in a different scale, individual scale. As you were saying before, you can systematize, you can think collectively, because education is in the hands of the different provinces or states here. It's not central. Can it be done? Can we systematize, or is it always projects connected to individual examples? Good question. And I was thinking of what Alicia was saying, and the challenge that rurality should be good is one of the bigger challenges. If it rains and I cannot come in or go out because I'm isolated with no roads, no pavement, that generates loss of hope with rurality. Now, rural life, rural employment should be attractive for a person who wants to feel good, who wants his family to feel good. And when we ask them why they do that and continue to be there, they have an answer because they know why. The question you were asking about the individual and the system's effort, but if we have no reach, the effort is unfair. All of the actors, all of the players are part of a solution. If we just go by a rural school in the middle of nowhere, and I go by every day without paying attention, that's one thing. Now, if I stop, change the way I regard that place, and think of how I can contribute, that is a new possibility for those students, be it 5, 3, or 1, for them to get to know something that's different. And that in itself is a small revolution. So we all should be involved, get involved. And maybe this is a little bit polemical, but, this example well, maybe this headmaster I don't like, and she follows this political orientation, etc. And that was a rural school in a rural, faraway area. The farmer wanted to collaborate, but he didn't like the headmaster because of his political ideas. So what I said to the farmer was, let's do something. Let's go to that school. Let's bring this headmaster onto our car, and she should tell us, here you should plant soybean, here you should do this, there you should do that. But I don't want to do that, said the farmer. But I said, it's the same thing that you are saying, but seen from the other side. You need to understand the need the other part has and what you can contribute to that need. There's a need for prickly pears everywhere. If I start asking questions, limitations will disappear. Living in rurality should be good, but that depends on how much commitment the system has, the civil society has. I don't live in rurality. My children don't go to a rural school, but every single time I visit a rural school, I feel the need to discover which refrigerator they are needing, quote unquote, refrigerator. I mean, I feel the need to help them out, to listen to them in their needs. When, the last time I visited a school with a refrigerator, it was such an awful refrigerator, and I was wondering, is this how I'm contributing them? This is a shitty refrigerator. Am I contributing? But yes, it was an impact, and yes, they were happy to get it, and it changed things for them. I absolutely coincide with what Luis is saying. When we start thinking of education, when we started thinking before we came to the governor's office, he mentioned, the governor mentioned Jose Manuel Thomas, who used to be a Secretary of Education in another province. And his words were, Alicia, the challenge is so big, so enormous, that we can't do this alone. The same for education is such a major challenge that we cannot work on it alone by ourselves. In fact, all of the lines we are taking up, we're getting help from different foundations, contributing capital, knowledge, specialists. We have been working for a long time with different foundations with which we put together an educational project, because this is also important. If all foundations go to a rural school to do what they think they have to do, the school will burst. So we need dialogue. We need to ask what they need and have a policy that says, this is what we are doing. Does it fit you? How would it help you? Yes, it's very tempting to take the floor again. A few weeks ago, with the contribution of a foundation, we inaugurated a school in a Tapemiri Guarani community. The kids were not there. They never attended the school, but they all were advancing in their education from year to year. They were promoted, but being absent. Now, when the players in the civil community started complaining about this reality, they didn't want them to be promoted. They wanted their kids to learn. And it was then when things started changing. So in the same way as we talk about romanticization of rural schools, I talk of rural schools and I get emotional because it's part of my own story. Many rural schools are very pretty, and they are well painted, and you think, it's people who are keeping it up. But my question from the audience is, we've always had a major gap between educational level of a rural school versus a city school, a standard city school, not a private school, public school. And that might have been creating a larger gap. Is this so? Really so? Is it a myth? Can we work on it? Well, let me demythify. There's not so much difference between the outcomes in rural schools or city schools. Nor is there a difference between technical schools and urban schools. The problem is more systemic. It's the educational system as a whole, teachers' training as a whole. Now, if I come to think about how many effective days students actually attend school in rurality vis-a-vis cities, I wouldn't dare say something, but in the final end of the year tests, the outcomes are not so different. It's not a tragedy. The rural school is not the poor little school. They do have an enormous potential because there's an enormous opportunity if we think of conflicts and vulnerability in urban areas, in particular certain districts. That is not present in rural schools. We were working at a school, a student had gone back home and had come back with a gun. The police had to enter the school. It was a difficult urban district. Another example, a psychotic student. The parents had to go to stop the kids, and they were fighting inside the school. It's so complex. I mean, life in the city, schools in the city. Vis-a-vis that, rural schools are like an oasis. I think it's a very interesting answer, and of course there's figures to back this up, so I thought it was good to hear about this. But, in northern Cordoba, the central province in Argentina, an area that is not so touristy, and a family there with a restaurant, owners of a restaurant where I was visiting, a small place. Their kids went to a school nearby, and the pandemic produced a totally different outcome. The pandemic was ridiculous at some point. What was being required by the central government was crazy. In certain areas, the school would not open because the building was not good enough to keep your distance from the next guy. So what did this family do? They have a restaurant, they have a decent lifestyle. So they took their kids to a different school elsewhere. And so now the kids go to that school that's far away, so the parents can't keep them company. They stayed in the first place. So what I was told was that these kids that in the past were growing up in their own little culture now were growing up in a kind of different culture because they were far from their parents. So We all understand that during the pandemic, rural schools started having more kids. Now, this social movement is it still happening? Is there an inflow towards rural schools, or are they now emptying the rural schools in favor of urban schools? Reality is that changes fluctuate, although they tend to be permanent. Most people are going to from larger areas to smaller communities. So small school districts are growing. The population is also growing, and so there's different size towns, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000. What we see in rural schools is that cooperative movements cannot be integrated because, for example, people who work on seasonal crops, they come and go, and so do their children. So if the whole family can go away is one thing. If it's just the man who can go away is one thing. If it's just the woman, the mother, it's a totally different thing. There's many elements here that make it very fluent. We cannot say there's a trend there, but what is clear is that in larger cities, this tends to disappear. Just an addition, I remember that rural school, well painted, that I fell in love with. Probably it was the parents who painted it and not the government. If the school looks good, it's probably because the parents are very active, helping out. I'm sorry, Alicia, it's many a time the parents who improve the schools, the buildings, because the building is not in the priority list of the government. Having said that, well, what to do? I mean, it is what it is. What I tend to see now is that there's a growth of rurality, not in the small towns, but in a little bit larger towns in rural areas. And there's no integration of those people with students that come from larger cities. There's like a parallel system where they have a closed-in community with a school for their children, so they end up not being integrated with rurality. They rather create a parallel reality, and everybody's losing in that situation. It could be win-win, because I come from a big city and I come to a rural area, and so we can get the best of both worlds. But instead of getting involved with that rural area and rural parents, I just create my own duplication of the city, and everybody loses. It's true that rural schools have cooperative organizations that organize fairs and soccer games and stuff to fund themselves. But in schools with fewer than 5 students, they don't have a cooperative institution of parents. So where we come in, we try to bring together different schools to create a stronger cooperative organization for all of them together. This is where also the school district should get involved to help these smaller cooperative efforts. On the other hand, and I understand what you say, in Entre Rios, my province, we are seeing not an increase of our population, but rather a decrease of our inhabitants. And what we see is that we need to reorganize the system saying this section is going to be closed up, this rural school needs another classroom. So what we are doing is trying to do microsurgery, so to speak. And we're seeing many cases where we can do this one-on-one. It's not a craft work, but it's a school-by-school perspective that we are trying to implement. I thank you both. I thank the audience as well. This part of the conversation had to do with stimulating ideas, not just being a passive audience, but also participating actively, because you may have an incidence on what goes on in the farming sector, and therefore, as people living in rural areas, you may get involved with what happens in rural schools and contribute your own opinions to your own rural schools. Thank you for being here, and thanks to our speakers. We thank Alicia.